Good evening and welcome to the National Writers Series event with the New York Times literary critic Dwight Garner. He's here to talk about this unputdownable book, Garner's Quotations, a modern miscellany, which has been described as rollicking, irreverent, scabrous, and amazingly alive. Hi, I'm Lisa Thavet, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you again. I joined the National Writers Series board out of the love for the power of story and how it can transform lives, young lives included. Proceeds of our events go to our Raising Writers literacy programs. Our virtual series began last April, and since then, we've held 16 virtual events with more than 5,800 people linking in. The series has been an overwhelming success, proving that the love of reading and writing is alive and well. Now, let me introduce our guest host, Doug Stanton. He's a co-founder of the Traverse City Film Festival and the National Writers Series. He is also a #1 New York Times bestselling author of In Harm's Way, Horse Soldiers, and The Odyssey of Echo Company. Tonight, he'll be speaking with Dwight Garner. Dwight first began collecting his favorite quotes as a teenager in what is called a commonplace book. He's now a book critic for the New York Times. For many years, he was an editor for the Book Review and was also the founding books editor of Salon.com. His essays and criticism have also appeared in The New Republic, Harper's, Vanity Fair, Slate, and elsewhere. So that's enough introduction. It's now time to get on with the show. I'd like to give a warm National Writers Series welcome to Doug Stanton and Dwight Garner.
Hi, Dwight.
Hi, Doug.
Welcome. So glad to finally meet you after corresponding for a couple of years. I've been a longtime reader of your really entertaining reviews in the New York Times Book Review. So thank you and welcome. And we're here to talk about this book, which, as I'm sitting here at my kitchen table prepping for this, made me laugh out loud. And it's just the book. It's just the book I need. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it so that people know what to ask for when they go to the bookstore?
Well, it's an unusual book of quotations. In a way, it's a criticism or a critique of a lot of book of quotations that are out there. Because when you buy books of quotations, which I love, I have many of them, but most of them tend to be really sort of upbeat and skewed to sort of Hallmark sentiment, the things we've heard again and again.
Right.
Penny word, things about, and those books are great. I have no problem really. But my book sort of takes the opposite view. My book is about sort of, hangovers and oysters and how to deal with, revenge and loss. And, it's the other side of life seen in a humorous way. So it's all kinds of emotional feelings. And also, frankly, a lot of the books of quotations over the centuries have not allowed swear words in them. And so in this book contains quite a few. And a lot of the best things people have said do have a 4-letter word or two in them.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, I was actually, it kind of, we'll talk about how you wrote the book in a moment, but I want to ask you, why now?
Interesting. It hit me that there needs to be a book like this out there. A couple of years ago, I was looking through my quotations, and as you said in the beginning, I have kept a commonplace book since I was very young. And if your listeners don't know what that is, it's a place traditionally where people, not always writers, have just written down their favorite passages from books, from poems, from plays, from movies. And, these began pre-Gutenberg when books were rare things indeed. And you might only have a book to have in your house for a day or two before you had to return it to someone. And so you would write down some of the things so you could remember them. And a lot of famous writers have kept commonplace books. Virginia Woolf did, E.M. Forster did, W.H. Auden kept a commonplace book. And they've always been favorites of mine. But I didn't know this when I was 15 and started keeping quotations. And now 40 years later, I've kept them for this long, and I have quite a few.
Were you? Yeah, you were born in West Virginia, but I believe grew up in Florida and went to Middlebury. And I'm going to run through this. And then you ended up at Newsweek for a while and were a founding editor of Salon, and ended up at the Times in 2008. Now that's really all impressive. But I want to jump ahead 9 years to 2017, when I think you did the most fascinating thing, which was go play backgammon in Monaco for Esquire magazine. Just tell us what was going on.
Well, what a boondoggle, right? I mean, the days of the great expense account trip for journalists are pretty much gone. This was one of the last ones. I mean, I'm a big amateur backgammon player. I wouldn't say I'm very good, but in the spirit of George Plimpton, the writer who played with the Detroit Lions and the writer who boxed with famous boxers, I thought, why not go play against the best professionals in the world? And I did. I had a blast. I got creamed. Backgammon, like so many sports these days, has become very mathematical. I mean, the people who have really worked out all the odds for every roll of the dice, for every position on the board. As a matter of fact, the person who won last year in Monte Carlo was on the spectrum. He just had a mathematical, like a genius mind for this stuff. And long gone are the days when James Bond played backgammon in a tuxedo. Which was how backgammon was in the 70s. Now it's it's guys with hoodies. It's kind of like watching poker on TV. It's like me who are these guys are brilliant.
Yeah, it's funny. We might see a movie called Dwight's Gambit pretty soon on Netflix about your quest to be the backgammon player.
Netflix's ears.
Now listen, when I tell everyone watching that it really is a delight to read your writing about writing, which is a rarity. And now you've published 2 books. You published one earlier about Read Me, right? About book advertisements.
History of book advertising, yeah.
Yeah, and now you've published a second book. What's it like to be on the other side of the desk right now? I mean, how is being an editor and a critic informed your writing?
It's incredibly hard. I mean, you really think to yourself, does the world need a book? Does it need another book? And does it need one from me? And I'll say that there are some days as a book critic where I feel like, for God's sake, Dwight, pack it in, never write another sentence. Because I read all the time, and I read things that just, blow my mind constantly. On the other hand, so many books are so incredibly god-awful. I think to myself, well, I could do better than that in the backseat of an Uber, And so your mind goes back and forth as a critic between thinking, and actually there's a quotation in my book from, I believe it's one of the founders of Farrar, Straus & Giroux, the publishing company that published my book, as a matter of fact, who said that book publishing should be done by failed writers, because failed writers understand what it means to write a book, and they can recognize the good stuff when they see it. And
I just opened it as you were talking. Poor Faulkner. Does he really think big emotions come from big words? Remember who said that? Hemingway?
Hemingway.
And what happens for those of us in the audience is you start to read it, and it's interesting, Dwight, it starts to roll. What's so great about this book right now in the middle of this year and COVID and et cetera, and you've written about that as recently as early December, is that it's not curated. You don't know what's around the corner. There's no algorithm. It's a book of surprises. And it's a book that actually gets its surprise by the language echoing and bouncing off, and we can see your mind at work, but it's really a delight. And I can see it sitting on someone's table when you walk into the room after a day of work, before you're about to do something else, you just start reading. That's what I did today. In the back, see the moon? It hates us, Donald Bartleman. It goes from the kind of, I don't know what you say, the profane to the very witty. And I just wondered if we could throw up some of these quotes on the screen. I don't know if Ben is there. Is there one in particular that we wanted to talk about? There we go. Tell me about Eve Babbitt, because we talked earlier, and you are fond of her.
Yeah, Eve Babbitt was a writer who was moderately well known, a Los Angeles writer in the 70s and 80s. I believe you worked with her when you were at Esquire. But she's been rediscovered in the last 5 or 6 years. Her books have been reissued, and she wrote 2 memoirs especially that are good. One is called Eve's Hollywood, and one is called Slow Days, Fast Company. And if people watching this like Nora Ephron and Joan Didion, I would say she's somewhere between the 2 of them. I mean, she's extremely bright and extremely wise, but she's also funny and sexy, and there's a lot of food, a lot of drugs, and she slept with Jim Morrison. She had a wild life, and she is very fond about her wild life, and she describes it very well. Growing up sort of young and beautiful in this under the Hollywood sign, is where she grew up, and she knew all these young actors and actresses when she was in high school. And I have a series of quotations about puns in my book. This is from Eve. Any man who will not resist a pun will never lie upon me. That's just funny. That's the way she writes, and always good company. And I can't recommend her 2 memoirs highly enough.
Do you remember where you were when you found that quote?
God, I don't. It's funny. Well, I do in the sense because I was reviewing Eve's book for the New York Times Book Review when it was reissued. And as I read a book, I am a destroyer of books. When I read a book, I'm underlining everything that I like in it, and I'm writing notes in it. And I'm sure I underlined that sentence at some point. And then I went back when I was prepping to write my review, and I typed it up in my commonplace book. Under coincidences maybe, or under puns, or I'm not sure, puns or humor.
Let's see another one if we can.
The assumptions a hotel makes about you, all the towels they give you. I think
okay. I think I met Stanley Elkin once in Vermont at Bennington. I was reading about him. You're fond of him. He's all throughout your book. Tell us why.
There's a ton of Stanley Elkin because he's one of the most undervalued, I think, American writers right now. A lot of his books are out of print. His book, The Dick Gibson Show, a novel about a disc jockey, is just one of the great novels in our literature. And Elkin, I believe he had MS near the end of his life, and he struggled. And he has another famous quote in my book. He says, I always look 8 years older than everybody else. He always felt that he wasn't attractive, and he wrote about that a lot. His characters are always sort of physically unappealing, but he was very appealing. And if you've ever heard him speak, and his writing is just fantastic. Matter of fact, I had to cut a lot of quotations from him in my book because there were too many.
I always look 8 years. It's true. You get all those towels. You think, who do they think I am? That I need so much.
I believe that quote is followed in my book with Tom Stoppard saying that no problem is insoluble given a big enough plastic bag. So it's sort of like, anyway, Elkin and Stoppard go together.
I know that you wrote on December 9th. I just want to talk a moment. What'd you do today?
Sorry, say that again?
What'd you do today?
What did I do today?
Yeah.
I woke up, I'm reading a 2-part biography of the painter Lucian Freud. And I realized today that, my God, these books together are 1,000 pages. And so I really read my tail off all day in a chair because I had to catch up a little behind. My review's due in about 3 days, and I've got still about 500 pages to read. And before I start to review I have a book due every Monday morning for the Times, and my reviews go online that afternoon, and they're in the next day's paper. My reviews appear every Tuesday. And the day before I write, I sit down and type all my notes up from the book, all the things I've underlined. And so as I'm reading, I'm underlining. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, I'm living right now on Cape Cod, and my wife is working on a book. My daughter is prepping for her LSAT, and we're all just here working like crazy.
Oh wow! Okay, and Cree has written. She published a book last August. A novel.
Yeah, a memoir, Lights On, Rats Out, which did very well, and she has a new novel out. And she's also a James Beard finalist for her cookbook, which is called Fish. So anyway, we're all just sort of, and it's interesting. I wonder what's going to come of COVID. I know that some writers whom I know are a little beaten down by COVID. They feel shut in, they feel unplugged, they feel like work is going very hard. Although I wonder what writers are out there sort of socking away the great writing that we'll see once this is all over. I mean, I know that during the wartime, many novelists sort of socked away novels which came out later. And I wonder what this literature will be coming post-COVID.
That's really interesting. I know you're a fan of Paul Fussell, who wrote the great book, Great War in Modern Memory, about how the Brits punted the soccer or football onto the battlefield beginning of World War II, and it ends in mustard gas. I'm just wondering, it leads me to a question I had for you. What is that node, that analogy? Do we have one yet? We're too close. How is the world changing?
Yeah, I wish I had an answer. I mean, are we heading into a new quote unquote jazz age? You know, are we looking for our next Fitzgerald when the world blossoms again? Is that what we're going to see? You know, the literary world, it's so much harder now to make generalizations about it. I mean, once upon a time, there was sort of a critical consensus and people read more or less the same things you often felt like. And often those things were books by white men. And, you know, America's been a nation of immigrants since its founding, and that's being expressed more in its literature. And you don't feel like there's literature's coming at you from just one angle any longer. There's so many, and it's an exciting time. And I think the book that comes out of this, that becomes the post-COVID, its first masterpieces, will surprise us, will blindside us most likely.
Yeah, and it's hard to say what that would be, what it would be in language or, I mean, does it end the way the Hemingway novel ends? You know, wouldn't it be lovely to think so? You know, that the world was so beautiful. You wrote in December, this was the worst year and nothing made sense any longer except when it was the best year, because time for reading seemed to expand like one of those endless afternoons when one is in the late stages of grade school.
Well, you know, there are a lot of us out there who are quasi-introverts, for whom COVID is a weird kind of blessing, even though I hate it, even though I'm the kind of person who likes to go out every night. I mean, when I'm in New York, I will go see a movie or a play or a concert or something 4 or 5 times a week. Whoops. And you know, and being battened down, I'm kind of going stir crazy. And yet, there's a part of me, and I'm sure we all have these parts of ourselves that kind of half the time wants someone to cancel that lunch reservation or wants us to, you know what I mean? There's this sense that, you know, I got out of that, you know, going to that. And there's a part of me that kind of loves COVID, even though I hate it.
Did you just go mute?
No,
you're there.
I'm back. Yep.
Yeah, there's a little lag out there on the Cape. Must be the wind. I want to ask you about just get some, because we have a lot of book lovers watching. And do you discern between popular fiction and literary fiction? And what makes a good book?
Well, I don't really think in terms of popular and literary fiction. I think of good fiction and not good fiction. I will say, I mean, if you want to be really sort of obvious and base about it, I guess you would say popular fiction often conforms to the kind of things people want. I mean, it's comfort food in a way. I mean, you know, you buy a certain kind of novel, you know what you're going to get. It's like going to Olive Garden. You're not going to suddenly get a bat on your plate, you know, or a live eel, you know, and it's, you know, it's you know what the experience is going to be.
I'm going to put that in my commonplace book. You're not going to get a bat on your plate.
You know, you're reading a serious literary novel. You don't ever really know what to expect from it. I mean, and I'll also say the difference between literary fiction and popular fiction, whatever. I hate that term popular fiction. I also hate the term literary fiction. But a lot of people like myself read literary fiction, not so much for plot, but for constant revelation of what it's like to be human, for truth telling, for expressing feelings that we don't have words for just allowing us to see what existence is in a more fine-grained way. And that's why I read. I'm not really a plot reader. Everyone loves a good plot. I love a good plot, but give me great sentences and great observations about what it's like to be alive, and you've got me.
Mm-hmm. Who is exciting you right now when it comes to that, just in terms of that revelatory experience that you've?
Oh, I mean, you know, this is a really good time, especially for young female fiction writers. I mean, Sheila Henn, who's Canadian, is one of them. Tessa Craig, whom I believe lives in New York City now. Karen Russell, Catherine Lacey. You know, but I'm also, you know, I still read a lot of sort of older stuff. I mean, I'm still, you know, having subtle, you know, now is the moment for it's a young woman's game in many ways right now, and thank God, because they're just genius writers. But I still go back. I still love John Updike. You know, I still love to read Philip Roth, and I you know, and Shirley Hazard and Mary McCarthy, and it's, yeah, you have to keep up with the old stuff as well as the new stuff in my game.
Right. So when I asked you what you did today, you said you read. I mean, you literally, I think give us the 20-second. The book reviewer is a mysterious occupation for someone. You're paid to read.
Yeah.
So, so
Well, okay. The worst part about COVID for me is that I am a creature, and many writers are. I live in coffee shops. I live in libraries. I go to bookstores and work in their cafes. And I sit there, I have my coffee, I read my book, and then I'll move on to the next place. Now, the reason I do that is we all know, even with the best book, if you get into a chair that's too comfortable, you're going to be napping in about 32 minutes. At least I will be. And so I like to move around. It keeps me awake. It keeps me alive. I like being around people during the day. And I find it hard now to read during COVID. I have to sort of keep myself awake. And it's not to say that the books aren't great. It's just a natural thing in a comfortable chair. So I try to be uncomfortable pretty often. And I'll often set myself a timer, and I'll remind myself once an hour to get up and to maybe spend some time just doing the dishes or doing something to get my blood going a little bit, or go for a short walk, get the paper. We have a dog. But yeah, a book critic's life is just a ton of reading. And, I work with the New York Times. I mean, we have meetings, Zoom meetings. We talk about future coverage. My colleagues and I work with 2 other daily critics. Your listeners will probably know this, your viewers, but there's the Sunday book review, of course, which appears every Sunday. And those reviews are done by freelance writers that the paper contacts to review. I'm a daily New York Times critic, and there are 3 of us, and our reviews appear on the weekdays. There's myself, there's Parul Segal, and Jennifer Zalai, and they are both lovely and brilliant and a treat to work with. And we talk a lot about the books we're going to be reviewing and why, and it's a nice procedure.
Interesting. Have you ever had a bad experience after having written a less than glowing review?
Has anyone thrown a rock through my window? No. More often after a positive review, I have a lot of lovely things writers have sent me, notes and things. I'm trying to think of a writer. I once had a writer who refused to shake my hand in a group in public. I think that's about the most expressive that a critic has ever been. I do understand more and more why a lot of critics are slight agoraphobes, don't go out a whole lot, because it doesn't do me any good anymore to meet a writer. Which is sad for me, because my best friends have always been writers. And now, let's say I visited, you and I we went out for drinks a couple times and we really hit it off. And I would say, Doug, if we have drinks one more time, I won't be able to review your next book, and this is not good for you. And it's not good for me. And so every friendship that I might make these days with a literary person, there's a moment where I have to say, is our friendship worth me never being able to write about you? So it's complicated.
That is interesting. That's a great character for a novel.
Well, there've been some.
Yeah, the self-exile. I think I don't think what I want to communicate to people watching is I think of you as a reader who happens to write nice prose about what it is you've been reading. A critic, in as much as the critic is being critical. What's been engaging about your book and your reviews is that it's revelatory. It's surprising. Let's go to another slide. There are a lot of quotes on the back of this book, on the front of this book. It's what do we got here?
Well, this is Oberon's quote about wanting to be compared to creme de menthe. Which is a weird quote. In my book, I have a couple of quotes in a row about creme de menthe, bizarrely. This is the kind of book where you will have quotes about creme de menthe. I mean, most books will not have that. We have something else up here.
This is the page from which it is, right?
Yeah, okay. So before that, A.J. Liebling is quoting someone saying that society women kissed as if they were sipping creme de menthe through a straw. And after that, I have Oberon's quote. Oberon was he died too young, alas. He was the son of Evelyn Waugh, the novelist, Brideshead Revisited. And Oberon, his son, never became as famous as Evelyn Waugh. But, he wrote a wonderful column for The Spectator in London, his diary. And his diaries are available. And they're just about the funniest book I've ever read. And I have a lot of Oberon-Waugh in this book.
Tell me about, he has a hysterical line about something about a prawn.
Oh, something like the best way to humiliate a prawn is to put it in the middle of the room and laugh at it, which is just what. Yeah, that's just the kind of thing that he would say, you know. And I'm sure that in his diaries it was in context. In my book, it's in the context of jokes about shrimp and prawns. So
It strikes me that this is so much more fun than Twitter, but it has the same haiku-like feeling about it. Go ahead.
A few of the quotes are from Twitter. I've recently gotten off Twitter. Sort of making me slightly crazy. I will say that, you know, Twitter is a weird medium. If people out there are on it, it's a place where, well, as we all know, talk these days is much more policed than it's been for a long time. And I'm talking about left and right. And one of the reasons fiction, I think, matters more than ever is fiction is the place where a great mind, a literary mind, can say things that and put them in the mouths of characters who might not be appealing, and say things and venture thoughts that might not pass muster on Twitter or somewhere else like that, which is one reason why fiction in a way has never mattered more than ever, because it's the one place where minds run free. And Twitter makes me think about that sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you see, and I'm though, that sometimes there are fences being put up around where the mind might run free when it comes to novels? I mean, have you had to address that in any reviews, so on?
No, not really. I don't think so. But like I said, I mean, fiction, you can say anything. I mean, the reason fiction is more truthful than nonfiction is that people write nonfiction. There are all kinds of reasons to hold things back. I mean, the memoirist or someone writing a memoir has to worry about their parents and their siblings and their children and other people, and they often pull odd punches, which is why Philip Roth said that something like memoirs lie, but fiction tells the truth. Because in fiction, you can say exactly what you want to say, perhaps because you're putting these words in the mouths of characters who are slightly different, or this experience in slightly different mouths.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You know, I meet people who tell me they won't read novels because they aren't true, and they're big nonfiction readers.
Right, which I think is kind of crazy. Although I love nonfiction too. I mean, to me, good writing is good writing, and I don't care what form it's in. As a matter of fact, a lot of the best writers in the world these days haven't even written a book. I mean, a lot of writers. I read columnists and I read journalists and I read all kinds of things. And you know, you don't have to write a book to be a great writer, in my view.
Oh, interesting. But you're being published in some way, or you're being distributed.
Yeah.
You've got it. There was this was Toni Morrison said, "A dream is just a nightmare with lipstick." I mean, that's
Toni Morrison really could, you know, she let fly. I mean, there's a lot of Toni Morrison in this book. She wrote really well about, I mean, she was a brilliant thinker, but she really was an earthy writer. And my book is very earthy, I would say. It deals a lot with eating and with sex and with strong feelings. And Toni Morrison was a writer who wrote about that stuff. She really was. I mean, I'm writing a book now about food and literature, and Toni Morrison's going to be all over it. I mean, she was one of the great food writers in her novels. Long sections about, you know, cooking eggs, you know, when you were poor, and cooking eggs when you were rich as well. And just, you know, lust and music, and, you know, so it's not surprising that she would say something like that to me.
How did you come across the new book idea? About food and what we're breaking up here just
well, I realized, yeah, it's probably my end, but you know, I realized there are a fair number of books out there about food and literature, but none of them really, they always tend to use the same examples about food. I'm a huge foodie to the extent that I've always loved to cook and to eat, and I love to read about food. I read a lot of chefs' memoirs, and my idea of downtime is to read cookbooks, which I do before bed. And there's so many great food scenes in our literature, in our world literature, that no one ever talks about. And I'm tired of reading about the beef stew in Virginia Woolf, and the and Proust Madeleine, and there are just so many other things to talk about. I have a whole section on hot dogs in literature, and on and on fast food, and on there's just the whole other world of food to talk about. And so I want to sort of talk about appetites and food as seen through the lens of novelists and their lives.
Is this a compendium, or do you not know yet?
No, I'm writing. It's sort of a memoir as well. I'm commenting. I'm writing about my own tastes as I work through it. So it's sort of but it is a lot of quotation in it.
Interesting. Wow. Are you an easy writer? Are you a troubled writer? Do you enjoy writing?
Well, see, when you've done the thing that I've done for as long as I've done it, I mean, I was a book critic early on. Then I became a staff editor at the New York Times Book Review. I was a senior editor for a decade. And now I've been a critic for more than a decade. You develop this muscle. I know that I have to write 1,000 words every Monday morning. And I've gotten fast at it, and if you told me right now that I'd write 1,000 words about that painting behind you, I could probably do it, within 3 hours, just because I have this muscle. I know how how to find something to start with, and then, find the middle of the piece, the thorax, and find a way to end it. And I've got a very strong muscle developed to write about 1,000 words to 1,500 words. It's when things get longer that it becomes difficult, because I haven't, written a lot of longer works. Although, a lot of great novels are just many chapters of 1,500 words. So.
What's the last book? Okay, I get that. You've got the muscle. You it's there. But what's the last book that you couldn't lift, that you didn't have, that just kind of blew you away? You remember?
Oh, the last novel I really, really loved.
Yeah, it took you a moment to figure out, okay, this is what I think about it.
Well, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of the novels this year that I love the most, and I'm kind of blanking at the moment. I did love. Blanking out here. I did love Isabel Wilkerson's nonfiction book Cast. I thought that the essayist in her, the book was criticized a little bit because she compared racism in America to the class structure in India and to Jews under Nazi Germany. And some people thought those were not exact comparisons, but for me, it was a thought experiment. And the essayist in Isabel Wilkerson is just a genius essayist, and I really felt some awe reading her.
I've got a question here, because panelists or attendees are starting to. Have you read Ruth Reichl's books, nonfiction and fiction, when it comes to food, etc.?
I have, and I love Ruth Reichl's books. I will say that I didn't like her novel, and I gave it a very, very negative review in the Times, which was awkward because she's a Times, she's a famous Times woman. She was a genius food critic, and her memoirs are by and large very, very good. And her novel I found to sort of be, I think she was trying to write a sort of popular novel and didn't apply herself very much. And she wrote a sort of light, trilly entertainment. It didn't work at all. And I was very hard on it. And she said something nice somewhere about it. She said, I didn't like Dwight Garner's review, but I'd still like to have lunch with him or something like that. So we can hope that happens someday.
So it's interesting, Dwight. So I get it. We were sitting around this table talking about her book. You would say, I didn't like the beginning. I thought she was an author. But what is the role of a review when it goes out into the bloodstream of our society? What do you hope it does?
Well, the first thing is just to tell people, hey, this is here. Often I'm the first review in the country for a book. That happens fairly often. One reason that's true is there's so many fewer book reviews than there used to be in this world, but that's a whole other topic. I, along with H.L. Mencken, said that it's always better to be charming than to be right. And I liked that phrase because it's easy to be right. Your Uncle Ted is probably right about something, and yet you don't want to hear him talk about it, And the best critics are the ones who are just charming and have interesting minds and have things to say about life, about literature, about all the arts, and can sort of make a lovely piece to read. Not being, when I say charming, I don't mean unserious. I mean serious as can be, but well written and provocative. And I want readers to look forward to my reviews, whether I like the book or not, whether or not it's a book they might want to read. I hope they come to a review of mine and just have an enjoyable experience reading another mind talking about this book.
Right. Does your book asks a viewer tonight, contain any quotes from Tom Robbins. That's interesting. No one talks about Tom Robbins these days.
God, I used to love Tom Robbins. As a matter of fact, he was one of the first people I ever put in my my very first commonplace book that I kept when I was in my teens, because I loved Tom Robbins. And I haven't read him for a very long time. And no, there aren't any. I apologize, there aren't any. He's one of those people that I think the reason why is there are a lot of people who are not in my book because they're quoted so damn often. I mean, I don't think there's any Abe Lincoln, there's no Einstein, there's no Woody Allen, there's no maybe one Fran Lebowitz, but there's this group of people, and Tom Robbins is among them, who are just on every bookmark and every pillow and every T-shirt, and they're just the most quotable people in the world. And Mark Twain's another one of them. And I'm like, let's have some new quotations. Is the point of my book, I think.
Right. What someone says, Dwight, are you a drinker? Because you know that all good writers were drinkers, etc. I'm not sure if I don't know Donna, but I raised that because you seem to have a healthy relationship to literature and writing. You know, I think Auden said, "I only write in a state of misery or
Right.
ill health." I think Eliot said the exact opposite, but it's
well, there are a lot of booze quotes in my book, many, many, many. I will say, in answer to that question, that two of my very best friends are former sort of they're booze writers, two of my best friends. So I know a lot about booze. Yeah, I drink in the evening, and you know, I'm with Christopher Hitchens. I mean, you don't want to wake up in the morning thinking this is the best I'm going to feel all day. So I'll have a martini and we'll sit around and talk. And you know, it's the best part of the day is cocktail hour, in my view.
What? Did you know Hitchens at all?
You know, I met him once or twice. I edited him once or twice. Just an extraordinary man. I mean, you would talk to him the day before a piece was due, and you have to sort of remind him that it was due. He wouldn't have started the book yet, you know. And the piece would come in the next morning and be letter perfect. And I don't know. He had superhuman ability to just to write. There's stories of him getting up at a dinner party at his house and saying, "Excuse me, I have to go write an article," and he would vanish for half an hour and then come back and have it done. And I'm not surprised, knowing him the small amount that I did.
Interesting. Someone asks, can you cite a quote that fits this plague, this dystopian time that we are in the midst of? Peace.
Well, I have PJ Woodhouse saying, "An apple a day, if well aimed, keeps the doctor away." Yes, there are quotes. I mean, Rita Dove has a lovely poem about staying in the room and all. I forget what it is now. You know, Mother, you and I, if we stay together here, we will be spared. There's a quote from Tom Stoppard about illness. There are a lot of illness quotes in my book. The lovely poet Lucia Perello, in one of her poems, and she died too young of a disease now, which I cannot remember, but she said, maybe beauty is medicine quivering on a spoon. And maybe beauty is one of these arm jabs, you know, that we're about to get. Maybe that's the quote.
You know, when you say stuff like that, I feel better. What I mean by that is the sentence makes me feel better, and it reminds me that literature does have a place to provide succor and refuge, and we forget that. Don't you think so easily these days when things are bombarding us?
No, absolutely. And you know, most people I know could not read at the start of COVID because their minds were just short-circuited. But now I find that most people I know are reading more than ever, and it seems to be true in terms of, you know, book sales are up in this country.
This is an odd question. We talked about it before this show, but I mean, if America was an author, what would be the book that it wanted to write right now?
Oh, for Christ's sake, Doug, Jesus. You know, in a way, go ahead.
No, it's all yours. Go ahead.
No, in a way, we talked about this. I mean, as I said, there used to be a typical kind. We would wait for the big realist novel, you know, the sort of big Balzacian novel, which would the Herman Wouk or the Big John Updike or the Roth, And and the world isn't like that now. And as I said earlier, I think the book that comes out of this that helps us think about it will probably be not the book we're seeing on the horizon at all right now. And predicting in terms of literature is really a mug's game. I just, it's extremely hard to predict where we might be going from all this. But I say, I can't wait. I can't wait to see what's going to come out of this. I think we may see early on, I think we're going to see a lot of things that are small and diary-like. I think a lot of writers are sort of shut down and are keeping journals. And I think we may see some interesting personal writing come out of this at first. And I think that might get old fairly quickly, but I think we may be in for some of that. And I'm fine with that. I actually enjoy diaries as a form. I read a lot of them. I read a lot of books of letters. I miss books of letters. I miss writing letters. So at any rate, it's not the perfect answer, but that's what I got.
It's not. It's an unfair question. I think it maybe goes to the idea that that there's no harmony yet. Everything is so bifurcated and split. We're many voices, but we're no unum yet. And I don't know if that's good. It may be good that we never become that monolithic American novel that we grew up. We're breaking away from that. As you said earlier, with more women writers, more people of color writing.
Yeah, there's a temptation now to throw stones at great ambition. And I find that, to be somewhat true. And so it's a time of writers finding new ways to sort of be ambitious. People are sort of writing around the margins now. There's a lot of irony in fiction, in really serious fiction. But I do think that COVID is going to break a lot of things. I don't think fiction that comes out of it will be quite what we're used to.
Irony, that's interesting. I know you just wrote a remembrance of Jean le Carré for the New York Times, whom I'm assuming you were a fan of.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the Cold War ends and he thinks he might be out of business, but he finds that the moral ambiguities of post, et cetera, are just as fascinating.
Right, and the reason le Carré matters to me, I mean, he had a lovely sense of menace in his writing and a lovely way of spinning out a plot that sort of had not just sort of that made your skin prickle, but had sort of international implications. But to me, why he was great is just he was simply a world-class writer of anything. I mean, he was as good at observing the world and observing his men under stress and his women under stress as any writer alive. And the fact that he wrote mysteries to me is almost of secondary importance. He was just a great writer.
I think we've moved. Yeah, there's another kind of genre of that. Someone is asking this question: what are your thoughts on Don Winslow combining fact and real-world events to create such wide-scoping stories, such as the Power of the Dog series?
Well, I've only read one Winslow. I forgive me, but because there's a critic on staff, Janet Maslin, who writes occasionally, and she's a Winslow nut, and so she's reviewed all his stuff, and so I haven't had time to really keep up. But what I have read, I thought just really moved and was really clearly this is a man who has endless knowledge of his subject. You feel he doesn't show off his knowledge. It's there when he needs it, but you don't feel he's ramming it down your throat. And his novels read like rockets, and they're very smart. And God love him now for what he's doing in terms of the Lincoln Project online with his political stuff.
Yeah, I don't know how he has time to write and do that. It's interesting, but I don't know him. But I appreciate those books a great deal. They're very, very, very hard to read, but very gritty and satisfying.
Yep.
Someone asked about Pete. We're talking about the older generation. Pete Hamill. Did you ever run into Pete Hamill and the chronicler of New York and et cetera?
I did. I met him once or twice. Once actually at Elaine's, which was one of his hangouts. What a sort of gruff old great newspaperman. I mean, there aren't many people like that left in this world. I mean, I can't think of another sort of. He quit drinking at some point, but the gruff, big drinking, deadline busting, deadline hurdling journalists that New York City used to have a lot of are kind of gone. Hamill was one of the last ones. His memoir, A Drinking Life, is just a really great book.
Yeah.
So he was the barfly who also dated Jackie Kennedy, which is every barfly's dream.
Well, if he's gone, who's there now? If that sensibility, um, what's replaced it?
That's a really good question. I mean, newspapers are not what they used to be. I mean, they're small now. I mean, in New York City, it's 2 daily newspapers are not in good shape, the Post and the Daily News. There used to be more dailies than that. Neither paper now has a really swashbuckling regular columnist, and newspapers are in a sad way. One thing I almost got into earlier, the saddest thing for me right now about books in America is Reynolds Price, the great North Carolina novelist, once said that when a first novel came out in America in the 1950s, it would get, a good first novel, would get about 115 reviews. And he was writing in the 90s. And he said now that same book might get about 15 reviews. And I would say right now that book might get 3 or 4 reviews. As a matter of fact, there's some books that are pretty good now that don't get reviewed at all. And it's because newspapers now don't have book review sections. All the little magazines have gone, the little alternative weeklies like the Village Voice, and every city, every college town used to have their alternative weekly, which reviewed papers. And I feel like it's not good for people like me. There's too much pressure. My reviews shouldn't, frankly, mean as goddamn much as they do. I mean, if you're in England right now, there are 7 or 8 daily newspapers, and the critics can talk, and they can bounce off each other, and there's a conversation. One loves it, one hates it. Now, you read for the Times to feel like you're taking this book's yearbook picture. The only 1 or 2 reviews this book might get, and it's pressure that's not good for anyone, and it's power that's not good for anyone. And so I hope there's some smart young people out there who'll bring some good book reviews, newspapers, and intellectual journals back to the web or somewhere.
Yeah, that's a very honest self-appraisal. It's interesting. I know you came up through a weekly in Vermont and et cetera. But it begs the question, why? I mean, you just said earlier that book sales are up. I mean, it is easier today to buy a book, and consume one, and it might be digitally, than ever it was. And at the same time, it's the whole promotion of it. This is why we started the National Writers Series, actually, to connect more people with their readers. And what's going on? Is it money? Is it corporate ignorance? Oh, did I lose you? No.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. Well, I mean, books still sell. I mean, NPR is a huge driver of book sales, and online discussions and Goodreads and Amazon, and there's a lot of ferment. Alas, there's not as much sort of smart criticism out there. I mean, it's just, the smart people haven't gone away. It's just there's no forums for them to write in, which is a drag. But it is good to see books are still selling.
So yeah, no, they're selling, but what you're saying is there are far fewer reviewers out there.
Yeah, I mean, you remember the days when a book would come out and there'd be a big banging review in Newsweek, there'd be one in Time, there'd be one in the Washington Post and the Cleveland Plain Dealer and the San Jose Mercury News and the and bang, 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 bang. There's like 100 flashbulbs going off all over the country, and now it's just there's my review. There may be a Sunday book. There's it might get 8 or 10 or 11. I mean, anyway, it's not the way it used to be. I mean, a really major book, a book like Isabel Wilkinson's Cast might get a lot of reviews still. But for fiction, it's harder and harder, and poetry almost impossible.
Yeah, true. What are you excited about? We're coming into the spring and the summer, and I mean, is there stuff out there you want to give us a heads up on, or what people?
It's a good year for biographies so far. I'm really looking forward to reading Hermione Lee, the great British biographer, has a big biography of the playwright Tom Stoppard coming up, which I can't wait to read. There's a biography coming out from Mark Harris, a really fine journalist, of the film director Mike Nichols is coming out. The Lucian Freud biography is coming out. There's a biography of the great thinker, the author of Orientalism, Edward Said. It's a good year so far. Fiction is much harder to see coming because we have better eyes for the old than we do for the new. And you don't know the great new thing until you've actually had a chance to read it. And So far, I've never read anything great that I'm looking forward to reviewing in terms of fiction. Although this past week, I reviewed Sarah Moss's new novel, Summer Water, and she's a very talented British writer, and I was pleased to read that.
Interesting. I go to some other questions here. Do you, I think this is everyone's secret question. Do you believe all book reviewers read the book they're reviewing as carefully as you do?
Well, Orwell has a piece where he proved that critics don't, he sort of, I forget what his trick was, but he inserted something in one of his books to prove that people hadn't read it. But, I read a book, I read every page for one simple reason: total fear that I'll make a screw up in the New York Times, in front of the 2 million of the smartest people in America, in the world, will read it and get to see my screw up. And also, as a critic, you really want to be definitive. Okay, if I'm picking a book apart and I say, not once in this goddamn book does he mention his mother, and if I'm skimming a book, I can't say that I'm paranoid that I missed the page where he talked about his mother, and that's just an example of all kinds of things. But if I say that, he doesn't use semicolons, well, maybe if I skim it all, I might miss that page. So I don't skim. Sometimes I will review a new novel, and I'll find out this person has written 7 previous novels, and I haven't read them. And I only have a week. I can't always read 8 novels in a week. So sometimes I will get those previous 7, and I'll kind of give them a fast read, just to kind of get a sense of what's there, to see if I can find some chiming themes and to feel for the language. But I will skim in that circumstance some older things, but I don't skim the book under review, just from total paranoia and fear. That's the only reason.
Well, I want to go back to some of these questions, but you just raised an interesting point. I just imagine you're trying to read 8 books in 1 week, and you've got someone studying for the LSAT in your house, and your spouse is also a working writer. Are you in your own planet? Are you walking around?
I've got a room. I can shut the door, but a lot of times we're sitting together, and we'll light a fire and we'll sit around and read. And so that happens sometimes. More often I'm by myself. As I said, pre-COVID, I would move around a lot. I would go to the library all day.
Got it.
Go to a nice bookstore. But now I just close. I have a reading chair, and I'll go in there. But reading chairs, as I said, are beware the reading chair. Pretty soon it's the napping chair, and then where are you?
So this is interesting. A viewer writes, I teach high school English, and I'm struck each year how few students read not only the assigned text, but outside of school as well. Any thoughts on dwindling reading, if that is in fact the case, in today's youth? Are any books you reviewed that you might grab their attention? I know that Gary Paulson has a new memoir out, doesn't he?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
So. God, I feel so lucky just as a reader that I didn't come of age during the time of video games. My son and his generation are just in love with them, and the hours they spend is just mind-boggling to me. And clearly, I'm missing out. Clearly, they're finding a kind of meaning there that I don't have access to. And I try to get them to explain it. I still don't get it. I will never get it. I am not a video game person. But to me, I think of all the lost reading time. But young people, you've got to. First of all, for most people, they either get the knack pretty young or they don't. And you can't really push books on kids. It's funny. People don't tend to read books that people push in their faces. You've got to find ways to come at them sideways. But I give my son a lot of books to read. One book I think for the hardest people to get to read are young men often. And a book that I give to people, for teenagers anyway, people over about 17, is a book by the Southern writer Larry Brown called On Fire. And it's about his experiences being a fireman in Oxford, Mississippi. And it's just very plain spoken. It's very masculine in a way. It's about firefighting. And yet Larry Brown has a way about him that's very sort of calm and smart and literate and wise. And yet he's talking about sort of, breaking down windows and putting out fires. And it's very masculine, but very sort of sensitive and smart.
Yeah. You brought up video games. Are you of the thought of, say, like a writer like Tom Bissell, that video game is a narrative and that you can write for it and et cetera?
Well, obviously, I'm sure there's some very good writing in the dialogue because there's so much money thrown at them now. There's money now to hire good writers for video games. I'm not saying it's not there. I'm just saying that I don't necessarily have the time to wander through the canyons and the byways with my 6-shooter on my, to go find that dialogue. I'm just not going to do it. It's just who I am. But I'm a word person. I'm an inky person. I like words on the page. As a matter of fact, one thing about COVID I don't like is that publishers are loath now to send out advanced copies of their novels. Critics review from what are called galleys. They're early copies of the book that they send to us. And now that the publishing houses have closed, they're harder to get. People don't want to work in offices. They don't want to print the early copies. And so we have to read more on.
Oh, you're freezing.
And I don't like reviewing from online text.
Yeah. You froze up there a moment, Dwight, but I think what you're saying is it comes to you as a digital arc.
Yep, digital advanced copy. And I don't like reading online. I can't underline.
Yeah. Interesting. Does your son like to read?
Not really. It's funny. My daughter reads like a maniac, but my son, I think, wisely probably ran away from the family business. And more power to him, I think. I mean, he's still young and he may come around, but I don't blame him. All his father did his whole childhood was sit around with a book. I think he thought, get me the hell out of here. I'm going to go and live my life in a different way. So I think my kids are really different that way, and I respect them both.
Sure, absolutely. No, it's the old thing about the knife maker son never has a sharp knife in the house. Yeah. Someone has asked, how are the books selected each week that you review? Do you pick them? Are they assigned? That's always kind of a mystery question with the Times Book Review.
Yeah, we pick them. No one tells us what to review. Sometimes they will suggest a book, and we'll, and we're free to do it or not. But no, about once every month or so, I'll sit down with my colleagues and we'll look at what's coming up. We just did, for example, we now know our dance cards are filled already through March and April. So I know when I'm reviewing already in those months. And I sit down with Parl and Jen, my colleagues, and we say, I'll do this, you do that. You've read this person's other books. Maybe this is best for you. Maybe it's time for someone new on Martin Amis because I've reviewed him 6 times, Parl. Maybe it's time for a new voice on Martin Amis. Why don't you do it this time? And we'll work it out. And we work pretty far ahead. I often make changes at the last minute because often you don't know sort of what the world's going to feel like in April. Maybe in April it'll feel like the books I've picked maybe aren't the right ones any longer. But we try to stick to what we've chosen already.
So Dwight, what makes it a right book for the moment? Talk about that just for a moment.
Hell if I know. I mean, I would say that part of the thing right now, frankly, is counter programming. I think a lot of people are tired of reading about the election. They're tired of Donald Trump. They're tired of COVID. I think that part of my job is to leave that stuff behind sometimes, and talk about other things. I think it's a relief to flip to the New York Times and not find a piece about those topics.
Mm-hmm.
I have to find a piece. I'm writing a piece next week about the painter Lucian Freud, and I think people will be glad to read about Lucian Freud and not about Mike Pence. And but other times you want your reviews to be of the moment. I mean, I've reviewed Bob Woodward books and political memoirs, and sometimes that's the thing to do. But I think sometimes people want a break.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're going to start to round out here. It's interesting what's coming up. What are your thoughts about Pat Conroy and Kurt Vonnegut? That's interesting.
The Great Santini is just a brilliant novel. As a matter of fact, my wife just listened to it as a book on tape, and I forget who reads it, but she said it's an extraordinary audiobook. So I recommend listening to Pat Conroy's The Great Santini on audio. I haven't read it for a while, but he's a damned good writer. Vonnegut I love. I've not read for a long time. He was someone I read like Tom Robbins. I would not describe him as a young person's writer, but in some way he is. I think he's best read sometimes when you're young. A lot of his works stand up. Certainly Catch-22 does, and Cat's Cradle and some other ones. But I've not read him recently. I love his nonfiction books, his collections of essays. He was a wonderful writer about thinking and about book reviewing and that kind of thing. So I'm a fan.
Mm-hmm. Someone is wondering, does the Times have a diverse group of folks who review books? And I guess they mean people of color or economically, I'm not sure, but it's, this goes to the question that we're having about, you talked earlier about the breakout moment for more people having a chance to grab a megaphone.
I think your questioner wants to know if it's all just bald graybeards like me reviewing books. And no, that's not it at all. I mean, my colleagues, Parl and Jennifer, are, both fairly young women. And, and I do think that there's a lot of different viewpoints, even among the daily critics. And the Sunday book review certainly uses all manner of reviewer, so yeah.
Someone keeps asking about, and I'll ask this about American Dirt and the brouhaha that came up with the publication of that book. I don't know if you reviewed it. I don't know if the Times did.
I didn't review it. The Times did review it. Yeah, I don't really have anything to say. I didn't review it. I can't say what but I do stand up for the notion that people should be able to write about whatever they want to write about. I think that the novelist has to be able to be free in terms of their subject matter, in terms of their characters. I am not big on the notion that there are some things people just can't write about. I think that way it leads to madness and into all manner of worse writing in literature. But having said that, I didn't read American Dirt, and I just don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that I think we're about coming to the end of our time here. It's 8:02. I want to thank you for this 60 minutes of respite from this day.
Well, I wish you and everyone tuning in, we could all go out to a bar and we were there up in with you,
I know, or a bar out on the Cape.
Yep.
Or as we go out, you mentioned Elaine's. Did you used to hang out there a lot?
No, I was not cool enough to hang out. I mean, Elaine's was the coolest literary bar in New York City. And I was too young when it was in its heyday. Its heyday was, 30 years ago. And I may look ancient, but I'm 56, I think. So I would have been in my mid-20s. And I wasn't hip enough to throw any weight in Elaine's. But I went there sometimes, and I got to meet some of the old guys. Did you go there, Doug?
Yeah, it was dwindling as it went. And if I was with a respected agent, I got a good table. But if I was just me, I was in the, I remember I was there a day when Lewis Lapham sold a book contract for the history of Princeton University, and he was elated by this fact. And I thought, wow, you get to do this for a living. And he was buying drinks for everybody. It was just, it was a wild place. I remember having just sitting at the table with the Sopranos cast. I mean, it wasn't me. It was just that I was able to draft onto the cooler coattails of people. But, it just brings up the question of community. And that was such it was insular and probably had a lot of problems. But, the sense and what it is as I round out here about your writing is that it feels like I'm part of a community. Whenever I open one of your reviews, I read the piece about your remorse over letter writing, and it was both old fashioned and kind of very witty and current at the same time. And you're able to manage that. So thank you. And this book, I got to say, it's very fun and it's funny and it's small and you can put it somewhere and pick it back up. And I can't recommend it enough. Go to your local bookstore, wherever you're at, and pick it up. And Dwight, someday in sunnier times, maybe we can get you here and talk about food and literature.
I would love that. What an august series this is, man. I saw the slideshow of the people, and I know this series well. It's very famous, but I just seeing the slideshow of all the people who've spoken here. I feel honored to be in their company, and thank you for having me.
Well, I want to come back and interview you about your novel. So you have to get to work on that.
I will. All right.
Do you have any interest in writing a novel?
Yeah, I tried once, and I kind of failed at it. And probably the best thing for me.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dwight Garner, and all of you. I do want to, as we go out, I want to say thank you to Northwest Michigan Center of Arts and Culture Network. They bring us together and they help us put out our guide. And we wanted to mention them earlier in the show. So thank you to those guys. And we'll see you around the neighborhood. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks so much for coming. I hope you will buy a copy of Garner's Quotations, which is available online and at your favorite independent bookstore, which will truly appreciate your purchase during these extremely challenging times. Thanks again to our incredible donors who have made National Writers Series a reality. Thanks also to our major sponsors, Cordia, the Northwest Michigan Arts and Culture Network, and a generous NWS donor who wishes to remain anonymous. Thanks to our grantors, the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and a special shout out to media sponsor, the Traverse City Record Eagle. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight. Good night.